Let's say that you're working on a car and you have these symptoms: a long crank time or a hard start, the engine runs rough at idle and at cruise speeds, and the fuel trims are rich all the time. What could the problem be? As our modern technology develops, we sometimes find that certain things that we were very familiar with are kind of disappearing. Well, not actually disappearing, we just don't see them very often again. For example, when was the last time you ever worked on a carburetor? What was once very common can get replaced with new technology. And although we try to stay current, we sometimes find ourselves working on one of those disappearing systems, and our familiarity with it gets a little bit rusty. Central port multi-point fuel injection is one of those systems. It's been around for quite a while, but it began disappearing in the late 90s and early 2000s. Some technicians really haven't gotten much experience with it lately. But there are millions of vehicles with it still out there, and so we still have to diagnose problems with them. Nowadays, everything is going direct injection, and there's even newer systems in the works. So for today, let's review something that was current, but is now kind of disappearing. Central multi-port fuel injection is one of those systems. In the early 90s, GM introduced the Vortec Engines. The main difference between the Vortec engine and those before was the cylinder heads and the reshaped intake manifolds where the air comes in. With those reshaped intake ports, it created a swirling vortex-like flow of air-fuel mixture into the Vortec engine. This required a new type of fuel injection system, and it was known as central port injection. Now, one of the big diagnostic problems with these systems was that all of this stuff was hidden out of sight, and the only way to gain access is, because it's buried under the intake, was to remove the upper intake. Although these systems supply fuel to each of the engine's intake ports, like other multi-port fuel injection systems, it has only one centrally located fuel injector, and it's called the maxi injector. The maxi injector is mounted in the very center of the intake manifold on the 4.3 engine and is hidden under the split manifold. Here it is with the upper intake removed. And this is where it is all hidden underneath that upper intake. You can't see it because the upper intake is in the way. And this is where it is all at, hidden under the upper intake, so you can't see it. Now take a close look at this picture. What do you see? I'll give you a few minutes here to take a look. Looks kind of dirty down there, doesn't it? Well, keep in mind, this is a real working engine, so dirty really isn't something so unusual. But what about this spot on the right, especially compared to the same spot on the left? Why is the spot on the right so clean? Well, it looks like it's been cleaned. And look at the pool of fuel sitting directly below it. Again, compare the right and the left. In fact, compare all four corners. Why is this corner clean, and what could have cleaned it? The pooled fuel is the dead giveaway, right? Fuel can be a cleaner, so fuel cleaned it. But where did that fuel come from? It's not supposed to be there. Let's zoom in just a little bit closer and take a look. You would never see this leak if you didn't power it up, though. You can do that simply by jumping the fuel pump relay. Now, you should have disconnected the battery when you began your work here, so some of you may be saying, well, all I have to do to power up the fuel pump is reconnect the battery and turn the key on. Will this work? Yes, but keep in mind, with the upper intake removed, you will have no throttle control at all. So do not crank the engine because it will rev out of control and probably cause damage. Now we know that all fuel injection systems must have passageways for the fuel to get to the injectors. And in this case, it's the maxi injector. The hard steel lines come from the fuel pump underneath, and they travel into the intake and then back out again. But they are still connected and sealed inside the intake. And to see it, you do have to remove the upper intake. At this point, you will notice that the fuel is pooled in the corner, but you still won't see the leak. So who would think that the fuel lines need to be powered up to see the leak? During the time that it took to gain access to look at this, all the fuel pressure has bled off of the system and the leak is no longer visible. So you simply have to power up the fuel pump to energize the fuel rail and the leak will be revealed. One last detail. The first generation has one injector and all the nozzles sprayed simultaneously. In the second generation, the single maxi injector was replaced with 6 individual injectors, and each sprayed individually. So if you have one of these systems on a Vortec engine, look for a hidden fuel leak. Now for the repair. Here is the complete unit. This picture shows the maxi injector and the poppet valve tubes removed. That shows that you could replace only the leaking fuel tubes if you wanted to, and leave the maxi injector and poppet tubes in place. Now keep in mind, just replacing the fuel tubes is an option, but the injector and the poppet valves have been exposed to the same amount of time and environment as the tubes were, and you have access to them right now instead of having to go back later and do this all again. So the smarter decision may be to replace it all now.